Welcome back to Bookworm. Today's book is about something we rarely question because it's everywhere: stress, pressure, constant urgency. We've been taught to see these things as normal parts of life, as the cost of success, as something we just need to manage better. But what if that assumption is wrong? The myth of normal asks a powerful and uncomfortable question. What if many of the symptoms we struggle with aren't signs of weakness, but signs of adaptation? Many people watching this video are doing what they're supposed to do. They're working, they're coping, they're functioning, and yet their bodies are tense, their minds are exhausted, their emotions feel flattened or overwhelming. This book helped me see that the problem often isn't individual resilience, it's the environment we're asked to survive in. When a culture rewards productivity over presence, speed over connection, and performance over authenticity, stress stops being a warning signal. It becomes background noise. If you've ever felt like rest doesn't actually restore you, or like something in your body is always bracing for impact, this book may feel unsettling and relieving at the same time. As you watch this video, I don't want you to diagnose yourself or your health. Just notice where the idea of normal has required you to ignore yourself. Before we continue, if you appreciate thoughtful conversations about mental health, trauma, and modern life, please like the video, subscribe to Bookworm, and share your thoughts in the comments. It genuinely helps this channel grow. All right, let's move into the ideas behind the myth of normal and explore why struggling doesn't mean you're broken.
Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to be exploring a really powerful book called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. And it starts with a question that honestly might change the way you look at things. What if the very things our society calls normal are actually making us sick? Right from the start, the book throws down this major challenge. It's asking us to just take a step back and think about a pretty radical idea. What if all the stress, the constant hustle, the things we just accept as how life is, what if those things are actually deeply unnatural? And what if they're the real reason so many of us are struggling? And this really gets to the heart of the paradox the book explores. I mean, think about it. We are swimming in wellness culture. You've got fitness apps, organic everything, mindfulness gurus. We have never been more obsessed with being healthy. So why are so many of us getting sicker? Why are anxiety and depression rates going through the roof? It just doesn't add up. To understand what's really going on, we have to look a lot deeper than the surface. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll look at 6 key ideas, starting inside ourselves with trauma and the mind-body connection, and then we'll zoom all the way out to look at the culture that shapes us. Okay, to really get this, we have to start with one single word: trauma. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, that word doesn't apply to me. But Dr. Mate's argument is that we need to completely rethink what that word even means. So when you hear the word trauma, your mind probably goes to really big, catastrophic events, right? Like a war or a terrible car accident. And of course, those things are absolutely traumatic. But the core argument of this book is that this definition is way too narrow. And because it's so narrow, most of us hear that word and think, nope, not me, and we miss something really, really important. And here it is. This is the big shift in thinking. Trauma is not the bad thing that happened to you. It's what happens inside you because of it. Let me give you an analogy. The car crash is the event, but the concussion, the internal injury, that's the trauma. The event might be over in a flash, but the wound inside remains. Trauma is that inner wound. It's a disconnection from yourself, from your feelings, that stays with you long after the bad thing is over. And this idea gets even bigger when we start to look at 2 different kinds of trauma. So big T trauma is what we usually think of, the awful things that happened that shouldn't have. But small t trauma, this can be just as wounding. This isn't about what happened, it's about what didn't happen. See, as a child, you have this fundamental need to be seen, to be understood, to have your emotions validated. But if your caregivers, even if they loved you, were too stressed or distracted to consistently meet that need, a little wound is created. You learn, subtly, that your feelings aren't okay, and you start to disconnect from them to keep the peace. That disconnection, that's also trauma. And this quote here from Bessel van der Kolk, who's another huge expert in this field, just captures it perfectly. When you boil it all down, trauma is a loss of connection. It's a disconnect from our own bodies, from our gut instincts, from who we really are. And it often happens so quietly, so slowly over time, that we adapt to it without ever realizing what we've lost along the way. So if trauma is this internal wound, this disconnection from ourselves, the next logical question is, where does that wound live? Well, the answer is that it doesn't just stay neatly tucked away in our minds. It actually shows up in our physical bodies. For a long, long time, Western medicine has treated the mind and the body like two totally separate things. You have a physical problem, you go to a doctor. You have an emotional problem, you go to a therapist. But Dr. Mate says this is a huge mistake. He talks about the body-mind as one single interconnected system. Because every emotion you've ever had to swallow, all the stress you've carried for years, it doesn't just disappear. It gets stored. It lives in your nervous system, in your gut, in your immune system. It creates real measurable physical changes. Think about it like this. Our body's stress response is designed for short emergencies. But for so many of us, that system is switched on all the time and never gets a break. And that constant flood of stress hormones creates incredible wear and tear on the body. Scientists call this allostatic load. It's like flooring the gas pedal in your car and just leaving it there 24/7. Eventually, the engine is going to start breaking down. And that breakdown looks a lot like this list: chronic inflammation, a weaker immune system, high blood pressure, all the things that lead to so many of the chronic illnesses we see today. So, where does all this chronic, body-damaging stress actually come from? Well, according to Dr. Mate, for many of us, the pattern starts with a deep, fundamental conflict that begins when we are very, very young. We are all born with two incredibly deep, non-negotiable needs. The first is attachment. That's our need to connect with our caregivers. It's pure survival. The second is authenticity. That's the need to be in touch with ourselves, to feel our feelings, to know what our gut is telling us. In a perfect world, these two needs would exist in harmony. But what happens when they clash? Imagine a little kid feels angry. That's a totally authentic feeling. But maybe their parent is stressed out and can't handle that anger, so they shut it down. The child gets a terrifying message, deep down. If I show this real feeling, I might risk the connection with the person I need to survive. And so, without even thinking about it, the child makes a choice. They will always choose attachment over authenticity. They push the anger down. Dr. Mate calls this the tragic transaction. We trade away our true self to make sure we're safe and accepted. And this pattern of squashing our feelings to fit in, it doesn't end in childhood. It becomes the blueprint for the rest of our lives. And this is the really tricky part, these coping mechanisms, being a chronic people pleaser or never saying no, or being really hard on yourself. They become so automatic that we just think it's our personality. You might say, oh, I'm just a nice person, I hate conflict. But what if that's not your personality at all? What if it's actually a brilliant survival strategy that you learned as a kid? It becomes like wallpaper in a room you've lived in forever. You don't even see it anymore, but it's there, coloring everything. So now, let's zoom out. Because these personal patterns of coping don't just happen in a vacuum. They are actually encouraged, and in a lot of ways demanded, by the very culture we're living in. Just take a look at this list. Does any of it sound familiar? Our modern society has become a super generator for the kinds of psychological stress that humans find most difficult to handle. So if you're feeling constantly anxious or burned out or just overwhelmed by it all, Dr. Mate's point is that this isn't a sign that you're broken. It's actually a completely logical, insane response to a pretty insane environment. And yet, what's the message we constantly get from our culture? We're told our health is all about personal responsibility. If you get sick, it's because you didn't eat right, or you didn't exercise enough, or you made bad choices. This way of thinking puts all of the burden on the individual. It makes us believe that our illness is some kind of personal failing, instead of seeing it for what it so often is, a predictable outcome of living in a deeply unhealthy system. So do you see what's happening? It's the exact same tragic transaction we talked about from childhood, just scaled up to a societal level. Just like a child learns to suppress their authentic feelings to belong to their family, we are all trained to disconnect from our body's needs in order to be seen as successful or normal in this culture. We learn to ignore our exhaustion to be more productive. We silence what we need to be a team player. Essentially, we're taught over and over to abandon ourselves. Okay, so if the problem is this huge, if it's rooted in our earliest years and reinforced by our entire culture, that can sound pretty overwhelming. It can feel a bit hopeless, right? Like, where do you even start to heal from something like that? And the answer, according to the book, is actually surprisingly gentle. Healing is not another project to get right, another thing to achieve. The first and most important step is simply to become aware of these patterns in yourself. And this is key, to look at them not with judgment, but with compassion. To see that your tendency to people-pleasing isn't a flaw, but a brilliant strategy your younger self came up with to feel safe. To see your anxiety not as a malfunction, but as your body's alarm system, screaming that something isn't right. That compassionate awareness, that's where everything begins. And this is exactly why redefining trauma is so powerful. If trauma is just a bad thing that happened in the past, then we're stuck, we're powerless. But if trauma is an internal wound that lives inside us now, well, then healing becomes a real, tangible possibility. We can't go back and change what happened, but we can absolutely learn to tend to our own internal wounds in the present moment. It's about coming home to yourself. And so, I want to leave you with this final, powerful idea to really sit with. What if we started to look at our symptoms, our anxiety, our chronic pain, our depression, not as enemies that we need to fight and destroy, but as messengers? What if they're actually a communication from our bodies, telling us that the way we've been living, the ways we've been disconnecting from ourselves, just isn't working anymore? What if our symptoms are actually a deep, desperate call from our authentic self, asking us, begging us to finally start listening? Maybe getting sick isn't a sign that we're broken. Maybe it's a profound invitation to finally become whole.
Welcome back. If this book resonated with you, it's likely because it didn't offer quick solutions. It offered permission. Permission to question the pressure you live under, permission to stop blaming yourself for reactions that make sense. One of the most important ideas in the myth of normal is that health isn't just about coping, it's about alignment. When people are asked to ignore their emotions, suppress their needs, and push through stress indefinitely, the body responds, not as a failure, but as communication. This book doesn't say that healing is easy or quick. It says that understanding comes before change. You don't need to fix yourself tonight. You don't need to optimize your healing. Sometimes the most radical act is simply recognizing that your symptoms are not random, they're meaningful. If this video helped you feel less alone in that recognition, please like the video and subscribe to Bookworm. And if you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear in the comments what part of modern life feels most unnatural or draining for you. Thank you for being here and permitting yourself to reflect. Take what resonated, leave what didn't, and move gently forward. I'll see you in the next one.